Welcome all to Legal Tech Week for November 8th, 2024, the show where we talk about the top stories in legal tech and innovation from the past week. I'm Bob Ambrogi, and our panelists today, as you see them before you, we'll go around and do a quick introduction and then get into the week's stories. So, Caroline, you want to kick us off?
Yes, hi, nice to see everyone. I'm Caroline Hill, Editor-in-Chief of Legal IT Insider over in the UK.
Glad to have you today. And Steve Lerner, how about you?
Hey, Stephen Lerner, senior reporter from Law 360 Pulse.
All right, Nikki Black.
My name is Nikki Black. I am the Principal Legal Insight Strategist at Affinipay, which is the parent company of My Case Law Pay, DocketWise, and CasePeer. And I write legal tech columns for ABA Journal, Above the Law, and the New York Daily Record, and also oversee and write our industry reports and benchmark reports on the Affinipay side of things.
Now, admit it, you really have Gen AI do all that for you, right? Is that fair to say?
Definitely don't.
Yeah, okay. And Steve, the other
Steve
Steve.
Embry, I write the yeah, two Steves. I write the blog Tech Law Crossroads about legal innovation, legal technology.
Yeah, I actually had somebody asked me that question. I had to speak to a law school class this week, and they asked me, I had to speak the morning after the election, which was tough. Speaking to anybody about anything was tough that morning. But I had one of the questions they asked me was how I use Gen AI in my reporting. I thought that was an interesting question. Maybe one we can toss around a little bit. I mean, I don't actually, they are actually wondering whether I'm using it much in my writing, which I'm not doing. But I've been using the summarization, using it a lot for summarization, um, and um, I'm a big Fireflies fan, so I use its AI transcription service to record all of my meetings, and I get a transcript of all of my interviews and meetings. But other than that, I don't know. Are you guys using it in your writing at all, or are you kind of using it more as an adjunct to what you're doing?
I don't use it in my writing. The only thing I use it for with my writing is sometimes I will ask it to recommend some titles for a piece, but I use like it'll give me six, and I'll maybe combine two of them into something that I think is interesting. I don't think I've ever used one of their suggestions verbatim.
I
Interesting.
definitely use it to assist with my writing in a bunch of different ways. One is titles, like Steve just suggested. My editors have always been very liberal with revising my titles because I suck at them. So that's happened a lot less now that this, just as you said, I will revise or combine two or change them significantly, but it gives me a jump start. And sometimes I'll use it when I just can't, when you get writer's block and you can't put pen to paper, so to speak. I'll say, like, create an intro and create a conclusion for an article that I want to write about X. And I
Yes,
rarely ever use any of it, but it gets me started and it makes me feel like the article is getting written. So I'll do that. And I use Grammarly for sure to check
me
everything.
too.
Yeah. And
I've used it. I used it on a long form piece, and gave it a whole load of data, like content and some quotes, and said, turn this into a news article. Gave it sort of quite a strict prompt. And it was so fast. Oh my God. But then the thing is, I'm not sure. I'd love to do like a comparison of it's impossible to do a comparison of if you hadn't used it and if you just it took a really long time to then reword, check because some of the quotes weren't right, but it was, I mean, as Nikki said, as the starting point, just to get some ideas flowing, it was so quick. And some of the structuring, pulling things together. But you have to check everything so carefully, as everyone knows.
Steve,
So writing articles, no. Writing emails, yeah. I've used it for that. I'm sure a lot of people have. And I think it's helpful for that sort of thing, for writing professional or personal emails. Gen AI is really helpful with that.
yeah.
I've also used it like when I finish an article, like when I finish what I want to be done with it, and I think, oh crap, I got to post it up on LinkedIn and Twitter. So I will often ask it to write an introduction I can use. I usually have to tweak that around a little bit because it sometimes they're a little goofy, but um, you know, beats kind of do that when like, if I'm tired, then I don't want to fool with that.
What about
Yeah.
you, Bob? Do you use it?
Well, I mean, like I was saying before, I've used it. I'll use it to kind of summarize things sometimes. I have tried, like what you described, Caroline, as an experiment, just to say, okay, here are my notes from something. Here's some documents related to it or something. Write a report in the style of a news story or something like that, or even the style of a blog post or something. And I'll give it a little more prompting than that. But I've tried that a few times. I have never liked what it's produced for me when I've tried to do that. And it's part of the reason is, and I haven't done it for a while. I haven't done it since the 4.0 or whatever, the latest version. I'm curious. I should try it again with 4.0, but it gets really sort of flowery and effusive in the language it generates. I mean, it'll always start with like, in one of the most significant developments in legal technology ever, my case added time and billing or something. It's like it doesn't understand context or anything like that. I mean, like you say, it will like make up quotes, and I have had that problem. And like I said, sometimes I'll feed it like a Firefly's transcript where the quotes are there. It doesn't have to make them up if it wants to quote something, but it doesn't get that. So I will say I've never published anything that it has written. I've experimented with it. I am curious. My son, who happens to be a programmer at Affinipe, my case, who plays around with AI a lot, has told me that he could probably work with me to help train it better in my voice and to write more in my style. And I'd be curious to try that. But I mean, ultimately, I do feel like the people who read us for us, not for
Yeah.
Something filling in the spaces on a page.
Yeah, I agree.
And so I'm kind of pretty reluctant to go down that road.
Yes, I think you're right, and I'm not sure. I mean, but it's kind of fascinating, and I do feel like it's beholden on us to be. We're always talking about. We urge caution, but we're saying, you should be trialing and trying and testing and using. I feel like we should be putting that to practice in our own lives. Rather than just sort of lecturing everybody else, we should be working out what the strengths and weaknesses are in our own lives rather than just lecturing everybody else.
Well, I
Fair,
use it
fair point.
constantly. I mean, not just, like 20, 30 times a day, personal and professionally. Like I'm constantly asking questions, and it was really useful to do that prompt where it said, based on all of our conversations, what insights can you give me about myself that I don't know? It does a great job. You should try that. It's a really interesting learning.
I'm
But
scared what it would say about me.
Yeah.
That's like psychoanalysis or something. I don't.
those are great.
Dear Embry, you are a rotten piece of crap. Gee,
Never.
thanks. I feel better now.
Yeah. I definitely use it for like for LinkedIn. I tell it kind of, this is the one I want to focus on. This is my article. These are the things I really want to highlight. I absolutely use it for LinkedIn posts.
Yeah.
I edit
But
them and I revise them significantly, but definitely it's a lift in that area for sure.
And
my
Does it end up
experience with
saving time? I mean, it seems to me that the time it takes to have it generate something like a LinkedIn post, to prompt it, to have it generate it, then go in and edit and clean it up. I could have written the LinkedIn post in like a quarter of that time. I mean, I feel like I don't get I don't get that. But
well, yeah, I don't know that that's necessarily true, because if I had to do it, it's not just the writing and the revision, it's the thinking about what you're going to say. And so when I use it for the LinkedIn things, I have found that it does go over the top. But if you take out the over the top stuff, then I got something I can just more or less use. I mean, and that's not the LinkedIn thing is not the most critical thing to be done in the world anyway. So I think
right.
it saves me time in doing that. I would, in all honesty, I think it does.
It
And by the
definitely.
time you get used,
Okay.
sorry,
Oh no, go
and
on.
by the time this is like keep practicing, keep finding out what it can do, what it can't do, get used to it. So, because I guess what we probably don't want to come to is in a year when actually these are LinkedIn posts are really not what people read us for. We should be getting good at those things, right? Like we should be starting to learn how to get AI to do it for us. Probably, I have to confess I don't use it for it, but I am playing around with it. I'm consciously playing around with it more, and I guess it will just keep getting better.
Yeah, the one other thing I will say I've done lately that I never used to do before, which is when I'm at a conference, I will again use my Fireflies AI to record, like say a keynote speech. Like I did this recently when I was at the Everlaw conference, and AJ Shanker, the CEO of Everlaw, got up and gave a keynote speech, and just turned on my Fireflies AI. So at the end of the speech, I had a transcript of his speech. And then I uploaded the transcript to ChatGPT and I said, what were the key points covered in this speech? And again, I didn't use it to write my report of his speech, but it actually did help me note both sort of outline my thoughts around his speech, but also pick up on a couple themes that actually I wasn't even thinking about after I had listened to the speech. So, it kind of picked up on some themes that weren't top of mind for me. Just had I just probably sat down and written something just from my notes, I might have missed that, I think.
It's
So
really
it's been
interesting.
useful in that sense.
Someone's recommended Bellows AI Copilot over Fireflies. Does anyone else use that? No, I haven't heard of it. Thanks.
Okay, well, Garrett will have to check that out. I haven't tried that. I have I did look quite a bit. I read a recent. I think possibly on this show a few weeks ago we had a little bit of a Fireflies versus Otter discussion, and I was doing some research into that, and I seem to find most of the reviewers seem to favor Fireflies over Otter, but I haven't tried this one.
I tell you what I did at Clio, where we all were, was I just opened Microsoft Word. I don't use Fireflies or Otter, probably should do, but I just opened Microsoft Word and just click the dictate button, and
There
it
you
just
go.
dictates it into Word. It's great and it's pretty accurate. The only thing is it doesn't. I don't know about Fireflies and Otter, but Word at the moment doesn't format it, so you just get quite a long stream of consciousness.
Yeah, interesting. I hadn't even thought about that. Probably to the same effect of Fireflies. I mean, Fireflies will also give you bullet points and summary and that kind of stuff if you want it, but I hardly ever use that stuff. All right, well, that was an interesting diversion for what we planned to talk about today. Um, and oh yeah, Descript is another one that is interesting for video, where you can kind of go in and edit the text and edit the video and do some other stuff. Although what I use for podcasts, I use Riverside FM, and that also has that feature where you can kind of go in and just edit the text, and it'll also edit the audio and the video that you've recorded.
Another thing that I would mention is one thing I think of it as is like a little assistant sitting on my shoulder, and sometimes I do gut checks with it. Like, I want to say this, does that make sense? Or someone just said such and such, does that make sense? Like, I constantly ask it, does that make sense? Or like, or is there another way to do this? Or in addition to getting information, but it's sort of like a gut check for me sometimes. I don't always trust its gut check, but it can be helpful sometimes, just to, because I work remotely, so it's not like I've got one office over that I can like stick my head in and ask them a question. I guess I could ask people on Slack, but you got to assume them. I don't know if you know what I mean, but I'll use it in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's quite
I haven't
nice.
used it that way, but that makes sense. I mean, like you say, none of us have editor. And that was another question they asked me at that law school class, was like, who edits your stuff for you? Like, nobody does. I just put I mean, the editors are my readers after I put it out there, and I like immediately start getting, responses from people saying you got this wrong or you got that right or whatever. But that gut tech thing is a valuable thing, I think.
Yeah, I have editors. I have copy editors, so maybe that's why I don't use AI. I have those extra set of eyes to
Oh,
check on everything after I post.
Copy editors are a very wonderful thing.
Mm.
I know from my former days in actual real publishing organizations. Uh, the most underrated job in journalism. All right. Well, we did have a bit of news this week in the United States, anyway, and some of us may have varying feelings about that news. But the electorate has spoken, for better or worse. And Caroline, you did an interesting piece just up today on some of the implications of that for the legal tech world. So, what'd you find?
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, it was quite tricky because obviously we've all got, I'm not in America, I'm not American, but we've obviously all got our opinions, strong opinions. So I tried to take a very unbiased, non-political take view of what the Trump administration will mean for legal tech. People actually who I interviewed, so I interviewed Mike Haven, who's the head of legal ops, or got responses anyway from Mike Haven at Intel, Prashant Dubey at Agiloft, and a number of people from semi-government organisations like Jennifer Swallow at Lawtech UK, Christina Blacklaws, who's the president of the Law Society, just to kind of gauge what impact they think it will have on legal tech. I think that whether it's tech or legal tech, probably there's the responses would be quite similar. I think that people were really excited. I think excited is the right word. I know that may come across as a bit strange for those of us who've got very strong views, but about the growth potential because of the deregulation that Trump is promising, and the tax cuts. So in terms of corporations, he'll be extending the corporation tax cuts of 2017. So for investment, growth, for M&A, which has been kind of stilted to a certain extent, and they think that the FTC will start rowing back a little bit on some of the prosecutions that we've seen recently, which would be good for M&A. So there's going to be a lot of growth and less regulatory constraints. And then on the flip side, obviously you've got what that means for AI, and particularly or development of tech generally, and specifically Gen AI, and the lack of regulation will almost certainly not be a good thing there. And there's obviously international concern about what that will mean, and how little regulation there will be. Also, there's concerns around diversity, because obviously Trump has got his mass deportation program, which could affect the people that are going to be working on Gen AI, like the data scientists, where we really desperately need diversity of thought, and for there to be a very balanced approach to developing AI. So there's some real concerns around that. And then I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, there's I think and then it was just in terms of the UK. The UK, what it means for the UK, because our government has badmouthed Trump and he hates us. So there's a little bit about, oh, good. So that's fabulous. And how's that going to impact legal tech in the UK? And there may be ramifications. Some people think there will, some people think there won't, but who knows? And my conclusion, which was about as fudgy as you could get, was the only certainty is that there's no certainty with this government, because as we know, he can say one thing one day and then do an entirely different thing another day. So nobody really knows, is the honest truth.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting. I mean, I actually read your article and felt like overall it was a sort of a positive spin a little bit on the potential impact on the tech sector broadly and the legal tech sector.
That's the feedback I got. So a lot of people, it's interesting because I just went out to people and just said, with no agenda. And it's interesting because I'll be frank with you, my personal leaning as a female, it was a big shock and not a good one. I'll just be completely transparent. This anyway, right? So I certainly didn't go out to people looking for a positive spin. I just went, what's your reaction? And from a legal tech, going out in that vein, as saying from an unbiased perspective, what's your perspective? I have to say, a lot of people came back with the economical growth stories, which are expected to be positive. So I guess it probably does come across as quite positive.
Maybe we'll all be talking about crypto again in a year, and Bitcoin and all that.
Exactly. I think that's 100%. Oh
So
yeah.
Musk would have it that way. And then Nikki, you had picked out a story that's kind of very related to what Caroline is talking about. Do you want to comment on that, or is that
Well, yeah, when I saw
I'll
what
drop
you
it
were
in the
going to talk about, and also, sorry.
I'll drop it in the chat.
Okay, I thought I was okay. I was just going to look it up. I thought I was muted. I thought you were telling me I was muted.
No.
I saw what Carolyn had written in. I have my legal tech roundup that I do every week on LinkedIn, which, by the way, I just turned into a newsletter. So subscribe to my newsletter so that you can get all of those insights. But one of the stories that I'd included in it was a story about how Trump, his election, would impact AI and the AI regulations, and would kind of open the floodgate for these companies to do whatever they want. And I mean, we're all sort of rolling back some of the roadblocks or regulations, depending on how you look at it, that Biden had put in place with his executive orders. But I mean, we're already seeing that, right? Like, I mean, this is the whole reason Musk cozied up to him in the first place, right? Because he was banking on the fact that he would get elected and he could, that Trump would get elected. But quite frankly, I almost feel like Musk got elected, and that he'd be able to do whatever the hell he wanted when it comes to the all the tech that he has under his, especially like SpaceX and everything else. But I think that we're seeing headlines that they're all starting to cozy up to him. They're hedging their bets, not even hedging their bets at this point. They're trying to make sure that they're under that Trump umbrella so that they can develop unfettered, which, for anyone who watches sci-fi, we all know that that leads to terrifying consequences. So I am trying to be positive about the future, other types of political issues aside, but I'm kind of terrified. I don't know about the rest of you. We'll see what happens.
I'm kind of terrified. The only like sliver of optimism I was able to find this week was when it's getting a little too political here, but the day after, when he gave his sort of speech about how really he wants to unite all of America and all that, and which totally contrary to everything he's said up until this point. But it made me think, maybe given that he knows this is his last term, unless he abolishes elections, as he's also talked about doing, that maybe he would want to leave a legacy as actually more of a moderate or effective or popular president in some way. I don't know what he even thinks that would look like, or what that would look like to him, but who knows? In terms of policy regarding tech development, economy and everything else, you just, whatever he has said up until now will have no bearing on what he actually does. You haven't been able to take him on his word up until now, so we will have to wait and see what actually happens on any of this.
The appointment of his chief of staff was telling. By all accounts, she's incredibly methodical and very capable, and really good at what she does. And so
She won't last.
well, that was a little disappointing because I was hoping chaos would just kind of reign supreme, which meant nothing would get done. But I was a little disappointed in that pick. But we'll see.
Yeah. Well, all right. Any other thoughts on Trump and tech and the future? Yeah.
So, I mean, it's hard to predict what's going to happen in 4 years in terms of politics. It's even more difficult to predict that in terms of technology. I mean, ChatGPT's less than 2 years old, about to turn 2 years old. Nobody at the beginning of Biden's term would have ever predicted that this would come at this point. So the innovations in tech will arrive in the next few years, and who knows what impact that will be. We may not even be talking about generative AI as a dominant form of AI in the next few years. So any wishful thoughts that President Musk or Trump or whatever it is wants to have in terms of tech, it's going to evolve, and it has nothing to do with who's in the White House. It's going to change over the next few years anyway.
Yeah.
Yep, that's true.
Should we just all call it a day, go and cry into our gin? Like, we were like, right, we're done here.
I don't know what it feels
Well,
like.
Yeah.
That is it from us. We're gonna go off and ball.
Uh, all right. Well, on that cheery note, we will move forward. Um, so, Steve, while you've got the floor, you had a story this week that it deals with a topic we've touched on and off on this show, and it's actually one of the topics that we talked about a little bit at our when we did a live version of our show at CleoCon. But that of the connection between generative AI and the future of the billable hour. And once again, I was not able to read your story because I am not a Law 360 subscriber. I am but a poor, humble journalist who can't afford those high-priced services.
Same here.
Perhaps you could tell us what you wrote about.
Well, it's okay. No one's perfect. So yeah, so for my column this month, I wrote about Gen AI and the billable hour. I think, as everybody knows, there's been a few surveys lately from different vendors in the industry suggesting that generative AI might replace the billable hour in some way. And I know the obituary for the billable hour, as everyone knows, has been written so many times in the past. This seems more real to a lot of people. The fact that generative AI is here, and you have all these surveys suggesting that its arrival could cause some type of change to the billable hour. And I know I think I'm the only non-lawyer in this panel right now. But when my column was saying that it's a bit too early to make these predictions. And I'd certainly love to hear what others say about it, especially I think everyone else here has practiced law. But the reason I feel that it's too early is economics suggests that law firms are making so much money that there's no reason for them to switch out of that model anytime soon. And then B, the technology of generative AI, while incredible, still has some ways to go before it can be that useful. So, just love to hear what everyone thinks about that. But the way I see it, it's a bit too early to make these sort of predictions right now that generative AI is somehow going to disrupt or even get rid of the billable hour at this point.
Shall we reenact our panel where we discussed the end of the bill? We had a big debate. Did you do? Who was on our? You were on a panel, right? When we no, you were on.
I
was, yeah.
Oh yeah, so we did a panel at Clio where we took different positions on the death of the billable hour in the face of Gen AI. It's sort of like tried to sort of contradict one another. I think it will survive forever. I think it's like a cockroach. I think that it will. I think that there will always be a part of work. There may be some bits of work which are done so quickly, repeatable work, which Gen AI makes into, we forget that we ever used to charge for it. But there will always be, in my opinion, a portion of legal work that is measured by the billable hour because people are really bad at value-based billing, and that includes in-house lawyers, is my opinion.
Yeah. As I've said several times, it's not just a business model, it's a cultural model. I mean, for law firms that bill by the hour, their whole culture revolves around that. Can I bill for this? Is an associate going to make partner? How many hours she bill last year? Part of it, of course, is business origination, but a lot of it is it all hinges on how many hours you bill. That's your value. That's part of kind of what you're worth. Almost every firm of any size has billable hour quotas for associates and partners, and there's a reason for that. I mean, you're looking at how hard people work. So that in addition to the fact, Steve, as you put it, law firms are making so much money right now, it's hard to see how they'd want to change. But it's both of those factors. We're making money, and that's our culture. That's what law firms do.
I think you guys all raised great points. I always go back to, and I do think it's too early to tell, but I do think that once the vast majority of practice management software tools and billing tools, depending on the size of the firm, are able to incorporate generative AI functionality into their platforms, it's going to give, and the ability to access and Q&A and analyze all of the data that firms have relating to all of their past matters, all of the past billing for those matters, all of the profitability, the revenue streams, and what that looked like. It's going to give law firms that are seeking to sort of be more competitive as the landscape kind of shuffles to query, use generative AI as like the interface to query all that data to come up with flat fee billing or alternative fee billing options that have a high chance of being both predictable, profitable, and competitive. And so that it's something that if firms can sort of unlock that potential, it'll make them really competitive in the marketplace. And that's what consumers want. Nobody wants to pay a lawyer hourly because you end up paying out the wazoo and 15 people review the same thing. This actually happened to me personally. And I yelled at my lawyer and they cut a big chunk of the bill off. 4 different people read a document that it took me 0.2 minutes to, or 0.2 to read. And it took these 4 other people 0.6 each individually. I'm like, it took me 0.2. So that's just bullshit. And I don't know why poor people are this thing. But it's really frustrating as the consumer when you see that type of thing. So I think that it's definitely going to maybe affect things in that way. We'll see what happens. We
So
want
I was
also-
inspired by you to go to ChatGPT and ask the question. I just posted its answer in the chat.
The other thing you always have to keep in mind when we talk about what law firms are doing, it will depend upon the business mix and the clients that represent. Law firms that are representing really large corporations, I mean, those clients aren't particularly demanding. At least I've not seen a lot of evidence of it. Flat fees or alternative fees. They sort of like the billable hour as a way to gauge what's going on. But individuals, that demand on law firms may be different completely.
Yeah.
And in that sense, that those kinds of firms may convert to a non-billable hour model much quicker.
And I did a panel
Sorry, Julie.
I did a panel years ago about the billable hour, and we had a whole bunch of real estate lawyers, property lawyers in the audience, and they were a tiny bit sort of disparaging because which is great after you do a panel, because they'd already moved away from the billable hour in favor of, the clients just wouldn't wear it basically. So they were working across the board on flat fees. So there's certain pockets of or types of law where they already have been forced effectively to move away from it, to contradict what I said in the beginning.
Yeah. There was, I know Joshua Lennon's in the audience. I know they recently put out the Clio Legal Trends report recently came out, which talked about a rise in alternative billing, but I think the ultimate conclusion was something 70, I forget what it was, 75% or something of firms are still largely billing by the hour. The Wolters Kluwer Future Ready Lawyer report just came out. Also, sort of again talked about a gradual shift toward alternative billing, but again, it was something like in that range of 75% or something of billing is all hourly still. So we're not seeing anything happen right now.
Yeah. I know you don't have access to the column, but those are the 2 surveys I called out in the column, the Clio one and the Wolters Kluwer survey, because they both suggested similar things, that things can be automated, that the billable hour probably could be impacted by this new technology. So, but your point's right, Bob, about what to expect.
Yeah. All right. Well, another death knell that's being sounded because of generative AI is that of TAR, technology assisted review, with some people saying that the use of generative AI in e-discovery review will replace predictive coding or other machine learning models. Steve, you had something on that this week.
Yeah, it was actually a post by Doug Austin, who many of us know and think quite highly of. And his view was, he said there's 6 reasons why generative AI may take over for TAR, and the reasons are, the ones that we all know. I mean, its ability to understand context better and have a better understanding, learn fast, learn things from what it's doing, and give more insights and all of that. But he also said, well, part of the problem is that predictive coding tar has, gradually become the norm. It only took us, what, 15 years to get that across, but we finally did. And so now it's like, well, we're going to do something else. This is going to be cool. We'll see how long that takes for that to happen. But the thing that I've always wondered about, particularly with generative AI, and he pointed out, is that you can give it similar prompts or even identical prompts to search for documents and get different results. And that's a problem, particularly, because I guess for similar prompts, you could sit down with your adversary and say, well, we will agree to this prompt for better or for worse. Maybe that's doable. But then if you run that prompt and get different answers, that is a problem. Um, and until that's sort of hammered out in some fashion, I think there's always going to be a place for tar. Having said that, though, the things that generative AI can do with large data sets, like you get in e-discovery, there's a lot of very useful things that you can do. I mean, if you're looking at the other side's documents to prepare for a deposition, I can see running generative AI prompts to call out odd documents. Yeah, the other thing I was just thinking as we were talking, I can see, even looking at your own documents, you could run generative AI prompts to say, find me the oh shit document. So you don't spend a month looking for it, and then on the last day, a week before the deposition, say, oh crap, what is this one? So I think did a presentation webinar yesterday with Pablo Arredondo, and we had this same discussion, and his view was that right now there's a place for both, depending on what you're going to use it for, with respect to e-discovery or just electronic data in general. And I think that's probably true. I think there's, for a long time, there's still going to be a place for tar and that kind of thing. But for finding stuff on your own that you need from the other side's documents once you have them, or looking for those bad documents or good documents within your own data set, I could see it could be quite valuable.
Yeah, I think I might have mentioned on the show previously, but going back to that Everlock conference I was at, they had during the keynote, they brought up a lawyer from Orrick Harrington who uh, has been testing, who was testing Everlaw's Gen AI review product, um, and who started out by saying he was a skeptic, and he tested it against traditional predictive coding review and against human review, and ended up being a convert. That he found that the generative AI's coding suggestions for documents was significantly more accurate than human review. He said by a statistically significant amount, and that with regard to sort of traditional machine learning review, um, it was more or less comparable, but certainly as good as, if not better than, machine learning review, and that in for kind of more nuanced areas where more subject matter expertise was required, the generative AI did better than predictive coding, and that also that the generative AI was far more consistent, so that it actually where it was getting something right in terms of coding, it kind of got it right through the entire review, meaning that actually reduced the need for QC at the end of the review, which is also a big chunk of the time involved in the whole predictive coding process. So I mean, that was one opinion, but he had this is the guy who's running e-discovery projects at Orrick Harrington, and he was pretty impressed with it. I know in a previous show of my podcast, Law Next podcast, I had Jeremy Pickens and Dave Lewis from Redgrave, which is, I guess, no longer Redgrave because they just got acquired. But discussing this very topic of whether Gen AI would replace predictive coding. And for them, it was still the jury was still very much out on it. That kind of like you said, Steve, that they're probably more likely that they would work in tandem or be used in tandem, and that there are some strengths to one, some strengths to the other. But yeah, I did think that the Doug's post was really right on, and some of the key things about the improved adaptability and learning and potential, the just sort of the ease of use and that sort of thing around it. It's so much easier to do than
Yeah.
predictive coding, and therefore more likely to be used, I think.
Yeah.
Someone,
More likely to be used by the lawyers actually doing the work as opposed to relying on, the people that create the Boolean strings to try to get all that going. And that's a real plus. I mean,
Yeah.
and as I've also said before, for senior lawyers, who often would say, go, tell the paralegals or associates, go find me this document and then try to explain what he or she was looking for, which may or may not work. If you can run those searches yourself, your ability to get something that you want back may be improved. So a lot
someone
of factors. Sorry.
Sorry, Steve. I keep interrupting you. Someone suggested that it will really transform the way that e-discovery is conducted, because whereas it used to be a laborious, exercise where, you'd be looking for the needle in the haystack, but you wouldn't continuously interrogate a corpus of documents, that potentially going forward it will be a case of you can just keep running different scenarios, right? That you can start interrogating the data in a completely different way. So to sort of have conversations internally and ask it, be interrogating it in terms of your different approaches to the litigation. Like it's going to be Gen AI will potentially make it much more accessible, rather than this kind of like one and done laborious exercise. I don't know what you think about that, Steve.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And that sort of gets at, the ability, when I sort of left the full-time practice, we didn't, of course, have generative AI yet, but we had a lot better ability for a lawyer like me who's had more experience to actually look for things on my own. And I think to get at your point, that's kind of the same thing. It's the ease and ability to anybody to go over and over and not have to worry about, well, if I tweak what I'm looking for 3 times, that's going to cost 10 gazillion dollars because I've got this army of people going out there, which of course brings us to yet another point about the billable hour that I think is kind of important, and that is these tools are going to impact the leverage model pretty significantly when you start thinking about it. I don't know how that plays out. Overall, because the leverage model made people wealthy by leveraging cases and getting lots of people to work on them. By the same token, if you don't have the leverage model, you don't have to pay all those people to do all that work, then your costs go down. And Jordan Furlong wrote a nice piece that I just read this morning making that point. So I don't know, so a lot of factors here. So didn't mean to get us off track, Bob, but
No, not off track at all. It's a great discussion. I mean, but even as we're sitting here talking about how lawyers are using generative AI, there are still lawyers debating whether it is ethical to use generative AI. And Nikki, who has been doing a great job of tracking some of the ethics opinions that have been coming out around that, has another one to tell us about, right?
I do, and I should add that a lot of my tips about the latest ethics opinion comes from Mark Palmer, who I think is in the audience. He posts about them on LinkedIn, oftentimes before I am aware they're out.
And on their blog, the IALS, not the IA, no, I'm sorry, the Mark's organization's blog. Sorry, Mark, I'm having a brain jam. The Illinois Committee on Professionalism.
Suitability.
Thank you. Thank you. God.
Yeah.
They do a great job on their blog of following this stuff.
One thing I was gonna mention before I jump into this about the prior conversation was that just reminded me of one of our takeaways from ILTACON, which was the generative AI is becoming the interface. And it sounds like a lot of the theme of what y'all were talking about was it becomes the interface for e-discovery that just makes everything more accessible. So But back to this, New Mexico came out with an opinion, a new opinion, and it was really not that, in most ways, not that different from any of the other opinions. Okay, Bob, put it up there. That then police. The only thing that I thought was interesting and notable in this particular opinion, and I don't believe I've seen this discussed before. Correct me if I'm wrong. I may have missed it, but I thought that they had a really unique view on a conflict of interest issue as it comes to generative AI. And what they said was that when you have a closed law firm system where generative AI is applied to it, you need to make sure that there are protections in place so that one attorney queries the system information, when you have those Chinese, what is it, Chinese walls, what do they call it, that you put in firms? You have those in place. You need to be careful that the generative AI doesn't skip through it and someone queries the system and it pops up information about a case where you have these like Chinese walls in place, which I thought was really interesting. Both that's clearly an issue. It was not one that I don't think I've ever heard anyone discuss. So they had someone who was really thinking things through, advising the committee, which I was really impressed with. But then the other thing is, I often like to say that when new technology comes along, the rules are enough, the comments are enough, the past opinions are enough. Like, why do you need new guidance? Why do you need to put generative AI specifically into the rules? Like, I think I just said that about Florida. But as generative AI is thought about more and more by people, maybe I'm wrong, because it is such a unique tool. Possibly it is different than the other ones because there are so many implications. And like, this is one I hadn't thought of. And I'm sure there's plenty of others that I haven't thought of and that other people haven't thought of, or at least raised yet. So it sort of got me wondering if maybe I'm simplifying this tech too much in terms of the application of the rules. But I thought it was an interesting take on it, and it was worth calling that out.
Well, you're not wrong. I mean, on the rule, I mean, there's two levels to it. One is, do we need new rules? And the other is, do we need new interpretations of those rules? And we don't need new rules, I don't think. I mean, the rules of professional conduct, I think, are sufficient to address generative AI. But yeah, I think some of these nuances that come out in ethics opinions, that's where ethics opinions help us understand this, or even comments to the rules as they evolve over time. But no, I think you've been right in saying we don't need new rules around this.
But I wonder,
And
though,
Nikki,
well, like with supervision, for example, it's a weird category of supervision. So I wonder if maybe that's a place that actually should be added. But go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
no, I was just going to say I don't think I had seen that sort of concept of the confidentiality and breach of the ethical walls. And the bigger the firm, there are more of those that are going to be, and that's certainly an issue and a concern that I had not thought of it before either. The supervisory thing is kind of interesting because I think there was a piece that I did about Altaquera and I can't remember the name of the law firm, which they'll kill me for not remembering. K.L. Gates, I think it was. But they actually have creating a training program for senior partners to be able to better supervise their associates that are using generative AI tools. And I thought that was a kind of a pretty unique thing to do, and probably a pretty good thing to do all the way around. So there's all kinds of different things that are sort of flowing out of this that um, we should think about it. But I agree with both of you. I don't know that we need to change the rules. We just need to look at the rules and how they should be interpreted in light of this technology, as we do with anything. I mean, we did that with the cloud, right? We did emails. We did that then too.
On that issue,
Some of us, Bob, remember when we communicated with this thing called letters. We wrote somebody a letter, and it was they were paper. They weren't, but nobody else here remembers that, but you and I probably do.
I remember the fact.
educate us about that, Steve. That doesn't ring a bell to me either. I guess you're a lot older than I am. On that ethical walls issue, though, I mean, that's an issue that can extend, I mean, beyond generative AI. If a law firm doesn't have its DMS system set up properly, that can be an issue, right? I don't know, their document automation possibly. I mean, there's other ways in which that even that could be an issue. When I was reading that, I was thinking, I mean, I guess that's a Gen AI issue. It's one I hadn't really thought about much either, but I'm willing to say that, and I know Michelle Spencer's on here from Net Documents, but I'm sure there's a whole bunch of law firms, particularly maybe smaller, mid-sized firms that where they're not, their systems are not set up to kind of deal with those ethical wall issues, and I think that's why firms also have to have in place really rigid and effective conflict checking systems um, in the first instance to weed out those kinds of problems.
They have to map it
Yeah,
out.
but it's not just the conflict checks though. I mean, a lot of times you'll have uh, it won't be a direct conflict, but there are things you don't want to tell one client about another client. They may be competitors in an industry,
Yeah,
for example. And so, Bob, you would work on client A and I would work on client B, and you wouldn't want something that I put into the generative AI to pop out that could put you in an uncomfortable position with your client. So you learn something about my client that you think, well, do I have a duty to tell my client that it's competitor? So, I mean, there's a lot of things that get kind of mushy when you get into that area. And they were right to bring it up. I think it's an important point.
I
yeah,
think they have to map it out. So I was really impressed. I wrote about Clifford Chance. It was our biggest, most read story by country mile recently. And one of the things that I was impressed by was how methodical they had been in terms of creating their policy and how it worked in terms of the types of data and the types of rules. And they've been very advanced in terms of the first firm to roll out Copilot globally. So it's not like they're slacking, but they didn't rush into proofs, POCs. They got it all mapped out very clearly in terms of how things worked. The training on the policy is mandatory. The supervision for partners, there's all kinds of things. And I think that, I presume a lot of firms have done some of that, but I think it's always worth revisiting, going how precise are we, or not precise, that's completely the wrong word, but how methodical have we been, and because things like Copilot will surface data without sort of work. Michelle's obviously the expert, and Net Documents has been focusing on this very much, but there are big risks that things will be surfaced by Gen AI that you don't want people to see for 100% sure.
yeah, that all makes sense. All right. Well, I get the one story I was going to talk about this week was something I just wrote about this morning. And some of you may have read about it already, but it is yet another lawsuit filed by a major legal publisher against a Gen AI legal tech startup trying to get into the legal research field. At first, I was heard about it and kind of thought, shades of Thomson Reuters versus Ross Intelligence, which is a lawsuit we've all probably written about at one point or another and followed for a number of years now, and which continues to drag on in the courts as Thomson Reuters claims that Ross Intelligence copied its case law, legal research data in order to train its own generative AI system. This latest case is also between two Canadian companies. Thomson Reuters and Ross were both based in Canada. This is also two Canadian companies, but this is interesting because it's brought the plaintiff. It's being brought by the Canadian Legal Information Institute, which is a nonprofit created by the major law societies of Canada to promote free and public access to the law. Um, and they're suing a little startup called Caseway, which literally just launched its product in September, right around September 1st, and claiming that Caseway systematically downloaded its downloaded legal materials from Legal Information Institute and is somehow using them in its service. Now, its service is sort of like a glorified chatbot interface for legal research. It doesn't actually provide cases so much as it it'll you ask it a question like, give me the 2 leading cases on this issue in Canada or something like that, and it'll deliver kind of quick summaries. And it, until the lawsuit, it was actually linking out to Canley for the full text of the opinions. And the Caseway people say this is all a big misunderstanding. They never copied anything from Canley, and that they think that Canley misinterpreted the fact that they were linking out to Canley to mean they were somehow copying their data. Canley says it found an instance of its data on an open source search engine on a site that was linked to Caseway or appeared to be owned by Caseway, and so they claim to have evidence of that, although they say they're still investigating, and this remains to be fleshed out. But I think the fact that this is a very well-respected organization devoted to open access to the law, that it's bringing this suit is interesting. And it certainly, in its defense, I mean, Canley does a whole lot of work to clean up and normalize and this data and make it searchable. They've been known for that. I think if I recall right, even the VLEX the VLEX's Gen AI product originally developed as something that Canley was using to help clean up its cases. I may be totally getting that wrong in my memory, conflating different Canada companies. But so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, again, it was just filed this month, and I am naive about Canadian civil procedure, so I'm not sure how it plays out over the coming period. But I assume there's some corollaries to the U.S. and there will be a response from Caseway, and we'll see what comes out of it.
I thought it was interesting, Bob, that the guy said, ever since the lawsuit's been filed, our business has gone way up. So I guess goes to show you litigation is good for business,
Well, yeah, I said in the story, there is that Streisand effect to it. It's he says not only has his business gone way up, but they've had a bunch of VCs knocking at his door, wanting to
Yeah.
invest in the company. So
I wished I would have thought of that concept when I was a practicing lawyer trying to get businesses. Oh, look, I got a great idea. We'll get in litigation. You'll make so much more money. I'm an asset.
yeah,
I'm no
yeah.
longer a slug. I can make you money.
Is litigation becoming the new PR? No litigation is bad litigation. I find it hard to believe that's a premise that's.
All right. So I'm dropping a link. If anybody's in Albany next week, I'm going to be. We won't be doing a show next week because I am going to be at Albany Law School for a program on the future of legal technology. And I'm just noticing, I think it says remote viewing option available. So you don't even have to be in Albany to watch this, I guess, if anybody's interested. Good panel of people. I'm going to be driving out there from Boston with Quentin Steenhouse from Suffolk Law School, and several other notable speakers on the panel. So if you're free next Friday afternoon, since we're not going to be on, you won't have anything better to do. You can check that out. Your alma mater, right?
Mine and Megan Kelly's. She was in my class.
They should have had you on the panel and not me, but or you and me, or all of us. They should have had all of us, whichever way. But anyway, so I think that's it, and we'll be back in 2 weeks then with another episode of the show. And I appreciate everybody's participation on the panel today, and everybody in the audience for sticking with us.
Thank
Have a good
you.
weekend, everyone.
Great
So
chatting with you. Thank you.